Now to create a room using socket.io as well as send messages between multiple users, we will have to set up some listeners and events in order to fire some event messages as well as listen to some messages and use those details inside our application and show those updated responses on the UI screen. And to do that, first let's go to our src. Under src, go to shared. We have a file called constants.jsx that we have created while setting up the code structure. Over here we will have listeners and events, so let's declare that. One thing we'll be having is a constant listeners, and also another constant called events. One event we'll be having is create a room, so let's name it create room. Another event that we will be having is room selected, when a user will select a room from the left side panel, so let's name it room selected. Another event will be when we send a new message, so let's name it new message. And we will listen to certain events, and let's call first event is when the user will create a room and we will receive the create room response on our client, so let's name it create room response. Also, whenever someone will send a message in a room, we will receive a new message response. So let's create a listener for new message response. Another listener we will be having is a list of all rooms, so that whenever a new user logs into the application, they can have a list of all rooms on their screen. So to do that, let's create one more listener, that is all room list listener, that is all room list response. So let's write it down over here. We can add and remove listeners and events whenever needed. So that's it to start up with the project now. Let's save this and close. And let's go inside pages index.js. And over here where we have initialized our socket.io, we will be setting up the listeners in order to receive the messages. So let's set up the listeners using socket.on. And to call the listeners, we'll be using the constants that we have created right now. So let's import them using import. Listeners from our shared constant, as well as we'll be importing events. So now inside our socket initializer, we will use socket.on listeners dot. Let's listen to our first event, that is create new message response, and we will create a function in order to listen the response and pass on the data and manipulate it according to our requirement. And we will call it on create room response handler. And also let's create the handler for it. We'll create it just below our use effect. Let's call it constant. It will receive an argument of type data right now, and we can add our task later on. Similarly, let's listen to another event, which is all room list response. So let's do this again. Listeners dot all room list response, and we will call it on all rooms list response handler. Once again we will create a function for it. It will also receive data, and we will add a to do over here so that we can do the task later on and update the rooms list. Let's set up another event. That is when we have a new message response. So let's add it again, new message response handler. Let's create the function for it again. It will also receive data. Let's add a to do for it as well. With this being done on the front end, let's go to our server under API socket.js. Over here we will create a list of sockets that would be connecting to our backend, as well as we will store the list of rooms. So let's create that now. We'll call it rooms list. It would be an array. Also we will have a list of online users that would collect the sockets that are connected to our application right now. Here as well we will import the listeners and events, but in this case the listeners of client side would be the events of server side, as well as the events of client side would be the listeners of server, right? So let's call it. And here what we'll do is we'll first of all import listeners, but we will be using an alias for it, and we'll convert listeners into events. It is just a naming convention that changes, and it would be same thing. It would be the listeners that we have declared in our constants, but at the time of import we are changing the name to events. Similarly we will change the events and we will be using events as listeners. So let's write it down. It like this, and now we have our listeners as events and events as listeners on the server. Now on the connection of our IO, what we will do is we will check if the user is already existing, that is the socket ID already exists in the list of online users. By using our socket ID. So if our socket ID exists in the list of online users, in that case user exists is true, and we will check that over here. And only if we don't have our user exist as true, in only that case we will be adding this socket ID in the list of online users. So let's do that as well now. So in our object we have stored the socket ID as well as the socket, so that in case we want to send the message only to the sender, we can use this socket ID to identify the socket of the sender and we'll send the message directly to the sender. So once this is done, we will again set up some event listeners on the server and fire some events over here in the server. So just like how we did it on the client side, let's do it again. Socket.on. And let's copy it 3 times and set up some listeners. First is on create room, when the client will fire an event for creating the room, and one event is on new message, when the client will send a new message. Another event that we have is when the client will select a room. In that case we have room selected. Now let's create some functions to handle our listener events. So let's go on the top and create a function when the user requests to create a room. It will receive two arguments. One is the data and the second argument is the socket from which this data has been received. Another function would be when the new message is received. So let's write it down. It will also receive two arguments, data and socket. Third function would be when the room is selected. It will also receive two arguments. Now where we are listening to our events, let's use these functions that we have created. So we'll use the data that is coming from our listener and pass it on to our function on create room, and we'll pass the two arguments, that is data as well as the socket. Similarly, for new message, we'll pass the data to our on new message handler, data as well as the socket. And again, for our room selected event, we will be having a room name, so we will pass that data Let's format the code. So now let's start writing our first event, that is when a client side requests to create a room. So let's fire the create room event from the client side first. So when we have on create room handler, inside this what we'll do is we'll fire an event and send the request to our server in order to create the room. So let's do that. So let's write socket dot emit in order to emit an event, and we will be firing an event of type create room. It will have an object which will have an argument of type room name, as well as the another argument key would be the username of our application, the owner of the room who has created the room, right? So once this is done, let's close the bracket. We have a small typo over here, instead of dot it's comma. Let's fix the brackets once again and let's save this. So with this, our client will now emit the socket event, and let's now catch this and listen to it in our server and create a room accordingly. So inside our on create room handler function, let's create a room. So here what we'll do is we'll check if the rooms list has this room already. So here what we will do is we will first of all check if the room name already exists in the rooms list, and if so, we will not create the room. So let's check that first. If rooms list dot index of, and here we will have the list of rooms, iterating over the rooms and returning room one by one. So what we'll do is we'll check on the room. If the room that exists already, room dot name, if that's equal to the room that we have received right now from the client, that is the room name. If that's equal, and if we find a value and the index is greater than -1, in that case we will not create a room. And if the index is -1, in that case it means that the room does not already exist and we can now create a room. So let's do that now using room list dot push. And inside this we'll create a new object which will have a property of name, which will be the data dot room name that we have received from our client. Another thing which we'll be having is room username, which will be the data dot username. Also we'll be initializing it with messages list, and it would be empty from the start. And another property that it will be having is created at date. So let's enter that. It would be of type new date. So once we have the new room added, we will notify the room creator that the room has been successfully created, as well as we will notify all the other clients that the room list has been updated and there is a new room in our rooms list. So let's do that by notifying first of all to the targeted socket who has created the new room, as well as by broadcasting the rooms list to all the users. So in order to do that, first of all, let's take the online users list, and inside this we'll use the socket ID of the center in order to find the socket for the user, and we will emit a message event, and the event would be of type events dot create room response, and here we will be receiving the room, and here we will be sending the room name that we have created right now. Also, another thing that we have to do is we have to broadcast a message to all the clients that the rooms list has been updated. And the event would be of type all rooms list response. Here what we will do is we will pass entire rooms list along with all the messages and details, so that the clients can automatically filter out the messages and list according to their requirement. So with this, our server can now create a room, and in order to show the rooms list on our client side, what we have to do is we have to listen to these events and format the data according to our requirement. So let's save this now and go back to our client, and over here in our on create room response handler, if we have the data, what we'll do is we'll check if the data is there, means there is a positive response from our server. In that case, what we'll do is we will set the selected room to the room that we have created right now. So whenever a user creates a new room, that would be selected by default for the creator. Let's now do this and remove our to do and save this. And for our all rooms list response handler, what we will do is we will create one more helper function in order to sort our rooms list so that latest room remains at the top level. So let's create one more function, and call it on update rooms list. It will receive a rooms list. Now what we'll do is we'll update the rooms list. So let's declare a constant called rooms list updated, and then we'll do the sorting operation on it, and then we'll write a comparator in order to sort the rooms list according to the created date. So once we have our list sorted, let's set that in our rooms list. So we also need to store our rooms list, so let's create a state for it. So it would be empty by default, and let's go back to our code once again and set the rooms list over here to the updated rooms list and save this. So we'll call this helper function inside our all rooms list response handler directly like this, and we'll pass the data to this function. Let's remove the to do and save this. Let's log the data first. So to log our data, let's use console log, and let's log the data, and we'll write a message stating it's the response of all rooms. And let's save this. Now let's go back to our browser and see when we create a room, does it logs the new response over here. So on our application, let's refresh this once again, and if we create a room, let's also open the inspect element. And click on create, and when we do so, we see that there is no response, and let's see why that happens. So inside our update rooms list function, we have a small typo. The bracket closes before our minus operation is done. So let's remove that bracket from here and add it over here. And you can see that A is highlighted right now, which was not there before. Let's stop our server, clear our console, and let's run the application once again using npm run dev, and let's now check the browser again. So now we are on our client side. Let's create a room. Let's refresh the application once before we do that. Let's click on create room, name the room anything. I'll name it room 1 and click on create, and you can see that we have a response of all rooms response, and it shows us one entry with the name of room 1 that we have entered and the username who has created the room, as well as there is no message right now and the time has been mentioned. Let's try by creating another room, and let's call it room 2 and click on create. We have another response and it shows that there are 2 entries. One is for room number 2 and one is for room number 1, and it has the username and the created date, just like what we have done before. Now once we have our rooms list, let's get rid of all these dummy data of the rooms list and show the actual rooms list over here. So let's get back to our Visual Studio Code, and over here let's go in the chat container and pass on the rooms list. Let's copy this, and inside our chat container, we'll take this props over here and pass it on to our room container over here. Then go inside our room container, and over here we'll again take the props of rooms list, and instead of this rooms list we will be using the props. So let's delete all the rooms list dummy data. Let's format the code and save this. Let's save the chat container. So let's format the code and save this again. Similarly, let's format the index.js file and save this as well, and restart our server. Let's check the code again on our UI. So now what happens when we create a new room? Let's create a new room and name it room 1, and you can see that the new room has been shown over here. Similarly, let's try by creating another room and call it room 2, and it has also been added, and you can see that there is a new room number 2 and it is shown above, just like what we have done for the sorting, and the new rooms appear at the top and the old rooms appear at the bottom. With this, we also need to highlight the selected room, and to do that, let's create another event that we have already declared and fire the select room event from our client side to our server. On our Visual Studio Code, let's create another function and call it onSelectRoomHandler. It will receive an argument of name roomHandler. It will receive an argument of room name. Inside this, we will check if the room name exists. In that case, we will set the selected room state to the room name, as well as we will fire an event to the server that the room has been selected. And it will have an argument of room name. We can also remove the set selected room state directly being updated inside our create room handler and use the onSelect room handler function that we have created right now and pass the room name to it. Also, before we test our onSelect room handler function inside our rooms list, we also have a selected room when we have our all rooms list updated, and our onCreate room response handler sets a selected room over here. So let's do one thing. Let's create a highlighted class for the selected room inside our room container. Go to a room container.jsx inside the chat container room container. Here what we'll do is we'll create a variable and call it lat active room container class. So let's call it active room classes. And whenever a room is active, we will give it active class from bootstrap and a text white class. Let's remove this class from our container and we will add this directly inside our room. So let's go to our room.jsx and paste this over here, and we'll have our active room classes set over here. But for our room container, what we'll do is we'll set a field called isRoomSelected, and it will show if the room has been selected or not based on the room name. So let's pass the argument called room.name is equal to selected room. So we don't have selected room over here, so let's pass that from our index.js file. We have it over here passed to our chat container, and also we have it over here and we are passing it to our room container. So let's take it over here from our room container, and now we won't face any issues, and our isRoomSelected field would be giving us the value if the room is selected or not. So let's go in our room.jsx, and here we will make a check if room is not selected. Also pass the room selected props to it, and if the room is not selected, we will have our active room classes to set background white. We will also change the way we are passing the class name and use the curly brace instead and use the tilt over here. And now we can add our dynamic classes over here using dollar and the curly braces and room classes dot join, and we will join them by spaces so that all multiple classes will have space in between. So here what will happen is, if a room is not selected, it will have a background of white, but if it is selected, it will have a class active as well as background white. So here what will happen is, if a room is not selected, the background of that room would be white, and if a room is selected, its background would be blue and the text would be white, and it would be applied conditionally over here. So with that, let's save it and close this, and over here also let's save this and restart our server. Let's clear the console, run our application and check the browser. Before that, let's save the index.js also, and now let's create a room, and it should be selected by default when we create it according to our logic. So when we create a room, it's automatically selected. Let's create another room and see if it is selected by default or not. So when we create a new room, it is also selected by default, and now we have to create a mechanism so that we can change the selected rooms. So let's do that now. So to do that, go to our index.js file, and here we have our onSelectRoomHandler function. So let's pass it down to our chat container and save this, and go to our chat container, and we'll use our function over here onSelectRoomHandler and pass it down to our room container and save this, and go inside our room container and call it again through our props and pass it to our room and save this. And inside our room, what we'll do is we'll pass an onClick event onto our div so that whenever we click on a room, it would be selected by default. So since we are passing an argument manually instead of the event argument, we are using anonymous function in order to pass the function a value. Only when the user clicks on the function, this function will get executed. So we are using anonymous function to pass the value of name to this onSelectRoomNameHandler so that the function gets fired only when the click event is fired. And if we remove the anonymous argument like this function will get fired automatically when this div is initialized. So we don't need to do it like this. We need to fire this event only when we click on this div. So let's do this and save and restart our server and check our browser. But before that, we have not passed the props over here. So let's do that as well inside our room and save it. And again restart our server. And on our browser, let's now refresh that again and enter a room. Let's say room number 1 and create it. Now again let's create another room number 2, and click on create. So we have our room 2 selected by default when we created it again. So that's fine. Let's try to see what happens if we select room number 1. So we can select room number 1 and change multiple rooms dynamically. So with that being done, let's now send messages in the room. So to send message, let's first go to our chatbox container by going to components, chat container, chatbox container, open our JSX file, and over here we have our input message. So let's take this value and pass it on to our socket. So before we do that, we have to declare a state for it. We'll call it message. It would be empty by default. And we will again create two handlers. One is for input change handler and another is for message submit handler. So let's do that. Here we will use event.prevent default. And we will take the message value from our target. And set this to our state. So let's add our on change input handler to our input using on input change handler. And we will also use the value of our message from the state. Let's now save this. And in order to submit our message, we will need to have a function in index.js that can pass the value of message from our client to the server. So let's create that first by going to pages, and under pages go to index.js, and we'll call this function on send message handler. It would receive an argument message. Inside this, we will check if there is no username, then we will return, or if there is no room selected, that is there is no selected room in which the user is there right now, or in case rooms list is empty. In this case, we will not do anything and simply return. In another case, what we'll do is we will emit an event. And the event would be of type send message. And we have our event name as new message. It would have arguments of author who has sent the message, and we have username for it. We'll pass message of the user, and we will have another field that is the room inside which the user has sent the message, which would be the selected room inside which the user is right now. So once we have sent the message to our server, we also need the message list on our client side so that we can show our client what message they have sent and received. So let's create a state for that as well. It would be of type array and it would be empty by default. Let's save this and go back to our on send message handler. Here when we have sent our message, we will also update our client state. using set messages, and we will get the current value of message. And we'll update the messages state by adding the new message that we have created right now. So let's save this as well. Let's format the code and save it once again. And now we can pass this on-send message handler to our chatbox container. So let's do that now. And go to our chat container and take the props for the new message we have created and pass that on to our chatbox container. And inside our chatbox container, let's take that value once again. And when the user sends a new message, we have to pass on that message to our on-send message handler, but we'll do that through a component. So let's create another function, on submit message handler, and call that function on submit. Here we will check if the message exists. In that case, we'll pass the message to on-send message handler by trimming it. Also, we'll set the local message state to null or empty so that the user can enter a new message once they have sent a message. So we'll use this on submit handler. Let's write on submit handler and use this over here on our button, on click event. Also, we will disable it in case there is no message. So let's write disabled is equals to not message, and also we'll trim it so that if someone enters empty spaces, they won't be able to send empty spaces as a message. Let's save this as well and format our code. So let's now go back to our backend server. Go to API socket.js, and over here where we have on new message handler, we will grab the properties that we have sent right now. We will grab the data that we have sent right now and see if there exists a room. We will then store the message inside that room, and if there is no room, we won't take any action. So let's take the properties out first by using JavaScript destructor. Let's close other files and continue. We'll grab the message, author and room property from our data and check if there is a room. Only then we will continue. So we'll make a check. If there is no room, then return. And in order to update a room with new message, let's create another updated room variable to see if the rooms list has a room with same name that we have received from our client. So we'll use the find method from JavaScript array. So this will find a room from our list where the list room name is equals to the name of room which we have received right now, and if that's the case, it will return the room from the array and we will have it stored in our update room. So inside our updated room, we have messages property that we have created above. So we'll add a new message inside that. We'll also add a property of created at in order to store the time at which the message has been saved. Let's format it and save. And when we have stored a new message, we need to broadcast a message to all the rooms and users that a new message has been received inside a room. And to do that, let's first check if the room was really updated. So if room was updated, and in that case, what we'll do is we'll use socket.broadcast.emit, and we have our event called new message response, and we'll pass an argument of type updated room. Also, let's change the name from update room to updated room. because that makes more sense than just update room. Update room seems like an action. So once this is done, let's save this, and we have to handle that new message response on our client side. So let's go back to our client side index.js file, and over here we have our on new message response handler, which is empty right now. So let's write the code logic for it. And to store a new message, let's create a state for it, and it would be null by default, means there is no message right which we have received. And inside our on new message response handler, we will simply set new message as the data which we have received from our server. And also let's remove the to do command and save this. So with that being done, this alone won't do anything, since we are having these message response received asynchronously and our state is being updated according to our asynchronous messages. So we'll have to use effect when a new message is updated, and what we'll do is we'll pass that message to our messages list. Let's also fix this typo over here, it's messages. Let's save this, and when we have a new message received, we'll pass that to the messages, and we'll pass this messages again to our chat box container to show those messages. In order to do that, let's write a use effect first. Use effect, it will be triggered when a new message changes. Inside this, what we will use is, if the new message is there, means the new message has been received, and also there is a rooms list. So when this is true, what we will do is we will create a new updated rooms list. So our rooms list right now has all the rooms list, but we only need rooms apart from the one who has received the message. And what we will do is we will take all the rooms who don't receive a message, and except that we will update the room which has received a message. So for that, what we will use is we will use filter in order to get a list of rooms that are not there for the message. So here what we have done is, the new message that we have received is a complete room. So if you see our socket message, what we have done is we have passed the updated room as a new message. And over here what we will use is we will use the name of that room in order to filter those rooms list, and we will update the room apart from these rooms list. So going back to our code, we can update the updated room list is equals to, and we will use our updated rooms list and add the new message over here. Once we have set the new messages, again we have to sort the list of rooms according to the date that they have been created. So we'll call on update rooms list method that we have created previously. This will sort the rooms list as well as set the state on the client for the rooms list. Also we'll set the new message to null, so that whenever a new message is received, we will then again fire this use effect, and this process continues whenever a new message has been received. Also this, our rooms list has the messages, but our messages state does not yet has the messages. So we have to update our messages state in order to show the messages on the client. And let's create another function for it, and we'll call it on update rooms for messages, and let's declare it over here. And inside this method, what we will do is we will take the updated room or the new room which has received the message and take the message property out of it and set it to our state. And to do that, let's follow what we have done previously, the updated room list. And now for this updated room property, what we'll do is we'll find the room that is selected right now. And for that we'll use JavaScript find method. Where room.name is equal to selected room that we have right now on the client. On that condition, we'll take the updated room, and if we are able to find the room, we'll make a check. If the updated room is there, means it's not null. We'll take the updated messages out of that. Since we have a messages property on our room, we'll take the messages out of it and set the messages to updated messages. So with that being done, we need to fire this on update rooms messages only when the rooms are updated. So let's create another use effect. Let's copy this above one once, and we'll make the changes according to our requirement inside it. Let's remove all the code inside it, and it would be fired on the rooms list being changed, and we will fire on update rooms for messages function over here, so that whenever a rooms list is updated, we will pass the messages from the rooms list and set it to our state over here. Similarly, whenever a new messages will be received, it will fire this use effect, and over here we will update the rooms list with the new message received, and this would be the chain for it. First of all, this would be fired, then this would be fired, and our messages would be loaded on the client. So let's go back to our chat box container and use these messages, and to do that, let's pass these messages from our index.js to our chat container first and save this. Let's go to our chat container. Let's take that props over here and pass that on to our chat box container. Now inside our chat box container, messages props as well, and here what we can do is we can now delete this messages dummy data. Also for our message, we have a property of author instead of name. So let's make that change over here. Our message has message.author property, and once we save it, we also have one more thing to do. We have use state, so let's import use state from React in our chat box container. So let's fix that and format our code and save it. Also, we have to do one more thing. Whenever a new socket connects to a server, we have to fire an event so that the new client can receive all the rooms list. So let's do that over here using socket.emit and use the events dot all rooms list response and pass the rooms list to it. Save it. Now let's go back to our client and see what appears on our screen. Over here I have created one more incognito window in order to chat between the two clients. So we have no rooms right now and we have no message right now. So let's open the localhost over here as well, and it will ask us to create a user. So I'm creating a user called guest and click on create. So with this, let me create another room first, and we'll call it room 1 and click on create. So we have our room created. It is selected by default on our guest, but it is not selected for our another user. So let's write a message over here and let's say hi from guest and click on send. If we send it over here, we won't see a message over here right now because we have not handled an event for selected room. So we'll do that in a couple of minutes, but before that, let's send a message over here saying hi from Tawfiq and click on send. So once this is done, you can see that the message from guest also appears as well as message from me also is sent, and if I send it again, you'll see that the message has been received on the guest as well over here. So with that being done, let's also handle the room select event. So let's go back to our code. So inside our socket.js, let's collapse this for simplicity. Inside our on room selected event handler, what we'll do is, we have this room name over here. Let's change that to room name so that it makes more sense. We'll make a check. If there is no room name, we won't do anything and simply return. Otherwise, what we will do is, we will find the room that has been selected right now. So let's copy this code from here and we can paste it over here like this. So what it will do is, we will have a room. So let's write room over here, and it will find the room that has been selected and return it to us like this. And we can send this room back again to the client by using new message response event that we already have right now, and we will send it only to the user who has selected a room right now. So let's use online users, and we'll use the socket ID of the user, and we will pass the emit. We'll use the events dot new message response and pass the room to it. So with this, whenever a client selects a new room, it would pass the messages of that room to the client. And since we are passing new message response with the room, it would automatically update on the UI. So let's save this and see our UI once again. With that being done, let me stop my server, clear the console and rerun the development server. And if I go back again to the browser and refresh my browser window, and now let me create one room and one more room, and if I send a message in room number 1, let me select a room over here as well. If I select a room over here, and if I send a message, let's do it like this, of hi, and click on send, you can see that the message is received on my another window. And if I send same message over here from it, like hi from Tawfiq, and click on send, you can see that the message is received on my incognito window as well. Similarly, what happens if I change my room? So let me go to room number 2, and if I write over here hi room number 2 and click on send, and if I go back to my previous window, I can select a room and you can see that the message is already there. So I can switch between the rooms and you will still see the messages. So with that being done, this project is almost now complete. This is a project that is mostly asked by interviewers and some companies in order to set up their notifications and messaging servers using socket.io. You can ask any questions that you might have faced problems with during this project creation and setting up. I would be there to help you anytime in the Q&A section, as well as you can send me messages on Udemy. Also, there would be a GitHub repository, open source and public, so that you can visit it anytime to match my course with yours. You can also take help from the community that we'll be building on Discord and post your inquiries in the messages. So good luck with this, and we will be writing cleanup functions in the next video.